The Child's Story Bible by Catherine Voss. Abram follows God. Part 1. After the flood, people again increased in number. They were not as wicked as men had been before the flood. They were afraid, since they remembered very well how dreadfully God had punished wicked men. Now God began to prepare the world for the coming of that man whom he had promised. You remember that when God cursed the serpent for leading Eve into sin, he said that someday a child of Eve's would crush the head of the serpent. Of course, the serpent really was Satan. When God promised that someday a child of Eve's should crush the serpent's head, he meant to say that someday a man would be born who would overcome Satan. Satan had caused sin and death to come into the world, but someday a man would be born who would again bring everlasting life by taking away the sin of the world. He is Jesus Christ. The first thing that God did to make the world ready for the coming of Jesus Christ was to pick out one good man and to tell him to leave his country and his father's family and to go to a country that God would show him. That man was Abram. His wife's name was Sarai. God said to Abram, "I will make of you a great nation. In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." God promised Abram that Jesus Christ would be one of his children's children or descendants. This was the son that had been promised to Eve too. He, Jesus the Savior, was to take away the curse of sin and be a blessing to all the world. Abram did as God had told him. He took his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot, whose father had died, and all the things that belonged to him with all his servants, and left his own country of Haran to start on a long journey to a country far away. Although Abram did not know where God wanted him to go, he obeyed God. He believed that God would take care of him. It was a long journey to this faraway country. When Abram and Sarai said goodbye to their relations and friends at Haran, it was forever. They never saw any of them again. Abram was not a young man when he left Haran. He was 75 years old. Sarai was almost as old, but men and women did not age as rapidly as they do now. Ladies at that time had nice things to wear, just as they do now. Sarai must have had beautiful golden bracelets for her arms, and golden anklets for her feet, golden earrings for her ears, and golden rings for her fingers. I am sure Sarai had a great many pretty clothes to wear. She was a very beautiful woman, and with her rich clothing and sparkling jewels, she must have looked very attractive indeed. Although Abram and his household lived in tents, he was a very rich man. He had a great many cows, oxen, sheep, asses, and camels. There were men servants to take care of the animals. The women servants milked the cows, made the cheese and butter, cooked meals for all the large family, and wove the sheep's wool into cloth to be made into clothes. Abram was so rich that he had more than 300 men servants and probably as many women servants. Of course, he could not manage his 600 servants himself, nor was he able to oversee his multitude of flocks and herds himself. He had an overseer named Eleazar to do a great part of the managing. At that time, of course, there were no railroads. Abram could not travel quickly to this faraway country. He had to travel by camel. The servants rode on asses or walked. Most of the servants were married, and there were many little children among them, even little babies. Of course, these little ones had to be carried in their mother's arms, while the mothers rode on asses. Big baskets were flung across the backs of the donkeys, one on each side, and the children who were too young to walk were put into those baskets and carried on that way. It seemed as if a whole village traveled along when Abram began his journey from Haran to this faraway country, Canaan. Abram was a true chieftain, a man who had many servants, flocks, and herds.